Welcome back everyone, Adzi here. Cyma MP5, one of the platinum ones, apparently stopped working. So I'm going to have a go at fixing it. Now the owner of it seems to think that these things have a common issue where the Mosfet's dying them. So he's asked me if we can have a look to see if we need to be changing that and replacing the whole thing. So that's exactly what we're going to do today, just to identify whether that is the issue. And then we'll decide what we're going to put in to go in there in place of it. Now this will be the first one of these I've seen with a dead Mosfet, if it is, but there's always a first for something. So we're going to pull it apart, we're going to have a little look and just see what's causing it. Now I've checked the obvious things, like making sure the motor connections are all done, so it's not that, there is something more involved. So we're going to rip it apart and we're going to have a little look. Now, there isn't anything obvious, is there? There never was going to be there when we're talking electrics. If it's something that's fried on a circuit, we're never going to visually see it. I suppose there's a couple of bits we can quickly do just to test, see if we can get any life out of it while it's open. So let's have a laugh, shall we? Shall we connect the motor? Okay, so gearbox is open. Now I'm going to test a couple of things. We're just going to kind of dummy run this here just to test, because obviously we're assuming the reason this has stopped working is because the Mosfet's dead. So we're going to connect a battery to it here so that I can manipulate things like the switch just to see if we can get any form of life out of it whatsoever before we assume that the whole thing's dead, and then we go and replace it. Now let's connect a battery. So it beeps. So there's a good sign. So that shows that that hasn't died completely in the sense of it's not getting any power. Now what happens, now let's hold on to the motor because obviously it's going to make its own journey around the desk if we do this. All I'm going to do is push the trigger. So basically when your main trigger is in it, all it's literally doing is pushing this switch. So let's see if this actually does anything. Okay, good start. Okay, oddly that seems to be functioning absolutely fine. So I wonder then, if we put this back together, whether that's going to work. And maybe it was just something perhaps sitting out of alignment or something like that that was stopping it from functioning. So before I go ripping all that out, because I'm a big believer, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Now there's no point us putting an expensive Mosfet in it for the customer if it doesn't need it. So what I'm tempted to do, now that we've seen that that actually functions, let's rebuild it. And see if it actually cycles like it should do. So let's give that a go first of all. Okay, so this is with the gearbox reassembled, purely so we can make sure the trigger is pushing that button that we've just seen. It kind of works when you've got the thing open. So we'll try like this just before we put it all back into the lower receiver and see if it's still alive at the minute. So we've got a battery on there. We've got a motor on there. Now, if I do that, now that looks like it's working. So I'm half tempted to say we put all that back together in this one and have a little look, see if it functions actually as a gun and it'll properly cycle the weapon. So let's try that. Okay, so that's it back in the lower receiver. Let's connect a battery. Okay, so it's beep, so that's a good start. Now, we'll try it in semi-auto first of all. Let's see if this is going to work now. So that's a good start. Let's try full auto as well, just because. Back to semi. Okay, so that I think proves that in this situation it's not the Mosfet that's dead, so that's a really good start. So it means we haven't got to replace it with anything. I reckon on this occasion, in this example, it was that funny little trigger, that little switch. Maybe it wasn't sitting quite right, maybe it had come loose, I don't know, who knows, but I haven't really changed much on it other than just make sure everything's in the correct positions. So maybe if there is a kind of a common thing going around of those Mosfets playing up, I don't know if there is, I haven't really heard it myself, but People have told me that they have had issues with them. Maybe it's worth checking those little triggers, I don't know, but that one seems to be working. Let's put it back in the gun now though, just make sure it functions fine as a complete AEG, and then that is mission complete on that one for now. Okay, so we're back in the gearbox again. So even though it started to look like we were getting somewhere with it and we might have identified what the issue was, it started being a little bit intermittent when I was pulling the trigger. Now, I don't know how well the GoPro is going to focus on this, but I've taken it off the stand for this. Now, this is a really tiny spring. That is the trigger bit that the actual trigger itself pushes, and it makes contact with some of the contacts on here. Now I think that this had just worn out, because on opening it again, I noticed the little bit that's in between here and here, that pushes that little spring to engage with the bits on the Mosfet itself, which the camera fails to focus on at this range. It just basically wasn't doing it. It was getting to the point it was intermittent. So I do think that that might be the thing that dies on these, quite possibly. Although this is the first one I've only ever seen, so who knows, it could just be this one. But yeah, we are going to put a brand new Mosfet in, and for doing that, I have got here, we're going to put one of them in. We're going to put Kestrel V2 in it, because that should drop in there quite nicely, and that will be a huge improvement, because that is then going to have optical sensors for picking up the trigger, so that we can't ever have something like that failing again. So it should be a repair that stays repaired. So let's make some modifications to this gearbox shell so we can actually fit the Kestrel in it. Okay, so this is the Kestrel that we're going to put in it. So it's a double-sided bit, so we need to make sure both sides fit in the gearbox. And because it is fully optical with the trigger and the bit for the sector gear, we do not need the semi-release lever anymore. So we're going to start by pulling that out, and then we can make sure this is going to sit flush in here, and of course on the other side, so that when we clamp the gearbox together, we're not going to damage or crush anything unnecessarily on the new Mosfet. So let's get pulling this bits apart and then making sure it fits. You're always going to want to make sure the surface is clean before you start putting the Mosfet in, because you don't want to get it all covered in grease. So let's clear all that out of the way. And we're going to split this in two, because it comes in two parts. And then we're going to see what bits we need to get changed in the gearbox shell to actually allow this to fit. Okay, now a common thing I see with these particular Mosfets, look at this bit here. So the little light sensor here is tucked in behind the gearbox, which is what we don't want. So we are going to need to modify that bit. Okay, so all I've done is I've taken a bit of material off the inside of that there, which just brings that edge further back. So it now means that when we put that on there, that is well clear. So that's good. So now that is nice and flush. On that side of the gearbox, we just need to make sure the other side is good, and then we can start thinking about putting it all back together. Okay, so we now need to do the other side of the gearbox. So that's quite flat on the back of it, so I think we're going to need to Dremel this out. But whilst we're here, we're just going to offer that up and just see if there's anything else that might need amending in here to make it fit. But I think we're quite safe, aren't we, looking at that? So let's get that smooth, and then we're pretty much ready to install that. Okay, so that is now ready to go. So we ended up doing two bits in the end, because by the time I'd filed that bit out there, I then noticed the bit that kind of was round this hole at the bottom here had a bit of a border, and that was causing it to get caught and raising up. But that now sits absolutely flush with no resistance. So we're now ready to reassemble everything and see if we can get this working with this Mosfet in there. And then just like that, that's all whacked together with the new Mosfet in there. So that is now functioning absolutely fine. So a nice simple fix to some degree on that one, but it does look like that The only issue with it was the little bit in the trigger. So the actual button that pushes the kind of engagement, obviously it just got a bit tired. Now I don't know if there is common issues with these. I have heard things, but this is the first one I've seen. However, I do think if that was slightly more durable, the rest of that Mosfet seems to be working. It's just the trigger bit's letting it down. Anyway, not that it matters anymore. That's all been replaced. We've got one of the Kestrel V2s in there, which I've had in a couple of my guns for ages now, and they seem to be absolutely faultless, so I quite like that. But obviously many other Mosfets can be used. Doesn't have to be the Kestrel. You can put in the things like the Perrons or the Titans or whatever you really fancy, really. But yeah, hopefully you might have found that useful. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one. Right, hold on a minute, everyone. Just before you go, I know I just said I'll see you in the next one. However, I hadn't got to finishing editing that video and uploading it. I've currently got another Cyma. So this time it's an M4 on the bench. And guess what? We've got same Mosfet. And guess what's failed again? This silly little trigger here. So maybe the words of these being unreliable, these Mosfets, are true of what I'm hearing, because I've heard it a few times now. I've had a second one here in rapid succession, which just happens to have the same fault. So yeah, maybe Cyma need to step up their game with these Mosfets, and it's purely that trigger, I think, that's causing the issue, because it seems to beep and whistle like everything else is working. It just doesn't recognise that the trigger's being pushed. But there you go. Now we'll end the video. See you all in the next one.